Today's conversation is all about the power of words. I'm Chloe. I'm a senior account manager here at The Writer, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by Sean. Sean heads up the mindfulness program at HSBC. He's an industry leader in mindfulness, and together we'll be talking about words in the workplace and how they impact people's well-being at work. Where did this journey start? Kind of how did you get to the point where you're looking at mindfulness kind of globally across the organisation?
Yeah, so I've spent 20 years working in digital teams. And during that time, I saw lots of people become ill through work, stress, burnout. And the interesting thing I noticed was that many of them, they'll take time off, they'll recover, they'll come back, and then they'll go through the same habits, the same ways of working as they did before. And it's just a cycle that they were going through. And I was watching this and I was noticing what was happening. And then my career started progressing. And then the teams that I was managing became bigger and bigger. And I started to become more interested in human behavior, how to motivate people at work, how to get the best out of them. And in some of my teams, I noticed that people who were very talented, very capable, weren't performing to the best of their ability. They were making fairly basic mistakes, which they wouldn't otherwise. So, for example, misspelling words that they know how to spell. And I started to become interested in this and I started to ask questions why.
Okay.
And then I started looking at the environment, because there's an old saying that if a flower doesn't bloom, it's not the flower's fault. You need to look at the environment. So I started looking at the environment and I realized that in many cases, people are working in a state of constant stress. And stress does some funny things to the brain. It really does. It makes you think and behave in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. So I then started introducing principles of mindfulness into the team. So helping people to manage their stress levels, their energy levels, helping them to be aware of how they are at a particular time. And the result of that was the team actually improved their performance. So we were publishing content across public websites at HSBC, and the error rate went down by about 50%. So the number of spelling and grammatical errors that were going live.
That's big.
Yeah. So by people actually thinking, okay, I'm about to push this big red button to put loads of content live. Am I in the right frame of mind to do this? And then giving them the autonomy to decide whether they do it or not.
Okay.
That made a massive difference. And that was the light bulb moment for me, which made me think, okay, there's something in this. There's something in mindfulness
Absolutely.
and understanding the way that the brain works that can help me to be a better manager and help me to create high-performing teams.
I guess to steer us a little bit more towards the language side of mindfulness. So we at The Writer are super passionate about words, and you're super passionate about mindfulness. And we've talked a little bit in the past about how those things kind of collide and come together, because actually the words that we use all the time, day to day, either in work or outside of work, can really have a massive impact on that level of stress and how people are behaving. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of 3 pillars that you would put mindful language into?
What I realized was that when we communicate at work, sometimes we put on that work persona, that work face. And, I'd go on to Zoom meetings and everyone was serious because they felt like, okay, this is my job, this is my role, so I need to have that kind of that mask on me. And I realized that people weren't acting like people. It was almost like they'd taken the humanity out of the conversation.
Right.
And it was very robotic and almost scripted. So then when there were points of disagreement or conflict, it was very difficult to actually resolve those because there was no human connection. And I started to look at some of the words that people use in the working environment, and some of them I found quite amusing when you actually think about it. I started to notice words like being held to account,
Right.
escalating, words like that, which for me are not useful or not productive words when you're having a conversation. I noticed people using terms like, there's a good one, the team mum. I don't know if you've heard this.
Yeah.
So if usually for a lady in the team who cares about the team, looks after the people, I've heard that label the team mum. And I'm not saying to not use it, because maybe that person likes it, but it's useful to be aware of the implications of it so that you can then ask the question, is it okay?
Yeah.
Do you mind being called a team mum?
Do you want this?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I was noticing language. Also, there's a lot of kind of war terminology that gets used, like
big metaphors.
Yeah, like being in the trenches.
Yeah.
And that can conjure up certain images for certain people. You know, it can be quite painful, quite stressful for people. So just thinking about these words that people use, I thought, how can we give some sort of guidance? And I remember a number of years ago, there was a list created with words that you shouldn't use.
Right.
But how can you do that across a global organization? Create a list of 50 words and say, when you're having conversations, don't use these words. And you know, some of it made sense. Words like whitelist versus blacklist.
Okay.
So like with whitelist being the good list, these are all the people that we want to talk to, and then the blacklist being the list with everybody that we don't want to.
Having that negative connotation around it.
Yeah, exactly. And for a lot of people, they wouldn't bat an eyelid, there wouldn't be any offence, but useful to be aware that it could be the case that someone is offended.
Yeah.
So rather than having a list of words that you can't say, I wanted to create a set of guidelines that people can use.
Right.
That are flexible, allow people to be human, have a natural conversation, make mistakes, ask questions. So I came up with these 3 pillars based on the 3 key problem areas that I was noticing. So inclusive language. It's all about using words and language that helps your team or the people listening to you to feel comfortable, to feel welcome, so that there's no kind of stress response. They're not thinking, oh, was that targeted towards me? So that people can just listen to the conversation and take in the message in the best possible way. The team mum one, that's a classic one. And just thinking about the people in the team, the people who are listening, and being conscious and aware of your words. So this is where mindfulness and language, I think, intersect, because mindfulness is all about awareness.
Yeah.
So that you're conscious and you're able to choose the words that you say.
Yeah.
It's not easy, because you've got to practice that, because words just come out. I'm sure they will today as we're speaking. And it's something to be worked on. But if we are more aware with our language, we can then choose the words more carefully,
of course,
so that we can reduce the potential for offense or upset, particularly if you're working in a global organization. So being aware of cultural preferences and how some words may mean something in one culture, but something else in another. All right, so the second pillar is global language.
Okay.
Now, HSBC has a presence in many different locations, almost 70 locations around the world. Now, in the mindfulness program, we're based primarily in the UK. So a lot of our content, a lot of our materials are in English.
Yeah.
And what can happen is it's very easy to use words or phrases that are kind of like slang words, or even like old traditional English that we don't really use when we're speaking, but somehow it comes out when we're writing something.
Yeah.
A few examples I can think of. The other day, someone said bits and bobs, like, I'm going to do some bits and bobs. And I asked, there was a Polish person and a German person on the call. I asked them and they said, bits and bobs?
What's this?
And, you know, often people won't ask the question and say, oh, can you just clarify what's bits and bobs? They won't.
They feel uncomfortable kind of in that space because they didn't understand.
Yeah, exactly. And they wonder if it's something that they should be understanding. So that came up, and I asked the guys, and they said, no idea what that is. And then other words that I've noticed, someone said the other day, I was totally gobsmacked, like gobsmacked. Like it comes out, and for a group of native English speakers, you don't notice anything, but actually it's a weird word.
Yeah.
It's something being smacked.
It's a real blend of quite aggressive language, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Gobsmacked and codswallop was the other one that I noticed. I'm very attuned to these words now as they're coming out.
We need like a glossary. We need a list of
Yeah.
alternative
Yeah,
options.
exactly. Miffed, another one. Someone said to me the other day, I was a bit miffed about that.
Yeah.
And some of this language is coming out in articles that are written, in communications that are going out. So what we're working hard on is being able to write with global language that anybody around the world can read and understand, even if English is their second language, it's not their native tongue. So yeah, that's what that one is all about.
It's a really interesting one, and it sits nicely with inclusive language, but it kind of pivots a bit to think more about the audience or the reader. So I guess the idea that whether we're writing professionally or speaking in the workplace, that actually the words that we use should always consider the person in front of us. And it's so easy, isn't it, to talk from our own perspective and write from our own perspective, but maybe taking a second before we start to think about who's on the end of this, what do they understand, what do they need to know from us, and then really positioning our language so that it's simple and it's human and it's understandable to everyone, and therefore it becomes inclusive. So then you're kind of doing one pillar and it leads into the other, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, you talk about simplicity. And, you know, we've done a course with you guys, haven't we, which was all about this.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is that by encouraging people to use global language, it's actually making the English better, because you're writing with more simple English.
Yeah.
And this is what we've worked on in the past, isn't it? So simplify the language. What is the reading age 11? Is that what we recommend now?
Yeah.
11.
So you want to write to a reading age of 11 to be as inclusive as possible to your readers.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing. And, you know, even when we're talking to the most senior audiences at HSBC, using simple, clear, unambiguous language, and it's landing well.
Thinking specifically about global language, at the writer, we have clients with a global footprint. So day in, day out, we're talking to clients about the words they use and how actually, if they are avoiding the acronyms, if they are simplifying their language, if they are adding that human touch, then naturally they are going to be accessible to their global audience, whether that's employees or customers. It's something that we talk about on a daily basis. So it's brilliant to see that falls into these 3 pillars.
Yeah, and it's great to hear that you guys, as the experts, are doing it. It helps me to justify what I'm doing. So that's really good to hear. So the third pillar is non-threatening language. And this is an interesting one, which people often misunderstand when I talk about it. Because when I say non-threatening language, people often think, okay, so we're not supposed to swear. We're not supposed to, you know, make fun of people. But actually, when I talk about that, what I mean is we're using language that doesn't put your brain into a state of threat.
Okay.
So as an example, let's say your manager sends you an email and says, can I have 5 minutes of your time? Exactly. Look at the response straight away. This is because the human brain has a negativity bias. Okay. We'll generally fear the worst. Mm-hmm. We won't assume it's because our manager wants to tell us we've done an amazing job.
Just in quick 5 minutes.
We won't. So we'll assume it's because, you know, there's some negative news coming our way.
Yeah.
But if that manager sent us an email saying, can I have 5 minutes of your time? I just need your help on this thing that I'm trying to work on.
Okay.
Then straight away, the stress response is able to calm down and the brain is taken out of a state of threat.
Okay.
Feedback is another one. You know, anytime you say the word feedback, there's a negative connotation. Like if I said, Chloe, can I give you some feedback on how you're handling this interview?
Go for it, Sean. I'll take it.
Yeah, you know, you'd assume I had some things to say. But it could be positive feedback. But there's that sense of threat as soon as somebody says, can I give you that feedback? So thinking about the words that we use and whether they could potentially put somebody into a state of threat, particularly for managers, leaders of people.
Mm-hmm.
So those senior people who communicate to large audiences, those one or two words that they say could have a massive impact on somebody,
Absolutely.
depending on how it's interpreted.
It's interesting to hear you talk about it in relation to managers and leaders, because really, if we're thinking about kind of a cultural change here, right? Being considerate of the words we use and being mindful of the way we frame messages, such as, can I grab you for 5 minutes? But actually like cottoning something onto the end so someone feels secure in what they know they're walking into. It is really something that starts at that management level, and hopefully is something that then embeds in an organisation and trickles down. It feels like a lot of what we're talking about here links back to this idea of psychological safety. So the cultural idea that we should really be able to speak freely in the workplace and express our opinions and thoughts without feeling risk that we might get negative feedback, or we're afraid of the response maybe that we might get. And psychological safety feels like a bit of a buzz phrase at the moment. We see it around in the wild. And a lot of big organisations are saying that psychological safety is a priority and it's something they're working on. In practice, in mindful practice, what does that actually mean?
So if you think about ancient humans and what they needed to survive, it was important to be accepted by the group. So you needed to show behaviors and values that would help you to be included. If you weren't included, then you might be cast out of the group. You wouldn't have access to food, water, shelter. So it then became a life-threatening situation.
Okay.
So cut to today's world, our brains still work the same way. So if we don't feel psychologically safe, we have those same reactions. It becomes a life-threatening situation as far as the brain is concerned. And that's why when you don't have that sense of safety, teams can't function. Individual people can't function because you don't have that comfort and your brain isn't free to work to its full potential. Instead, it's gone into a state where it's trying to save your life. It's sensed danger and it's saying, right, the only thing I need to do is save this person's life right now, which then takes away from all the great work that you're trying to do.
And language itself can play a big part in creating that psychological safety, right? So the way that we communicate with our teams, the way we communicate with the people that we're managing maybe is a really good starting point for creating or embedding that culture of psychological safety.
Yeah, and being deliberate about the language, being conscious about it, because too often we're not. But if we think about, okay, what is the language I could use that moves the brains of these people from an away state into a toward state? What could that do? If I'm in charge of an organizational change, how can I get these people to come along with me on the journey rather than trying to resist? So thinking, what is the language that will resonate with them, that will connect with their brains at a kind of neurological level, so that they are then compelled to come along on that journey with me. So you can start to make adjustments to the language that you use. And what I find is we don't spend enough time thinking about the language and the words. Sometimes we're firing off emails while we're listening to a Zoom call. We're only paying half the attention. And when we do that, we lose a lot. Firstly, we're not speaking in person anyway. We're sending an email.
Right.
Then we're only giving it half of our attention. So a lot of the context can then get missed. Take this as an example. On a Wednesday, a manager emails their team and says, tomorrow's a home working day. I'll see you on Friday.
Right. Okay.
What does that mean? Does that mean tomorrow's a home working day for the manager, but the team still have to come in? See you on Friday.
It's very ambiguous, isn't it?
Yeah. Or can the team all work from home tomorrow? That's the sort of impact that unconscious communication can have.
It's that thought, that pause. Like we always say at the writer, you should pause before you ping. You should stop. You should think. You should read what you've said and make sure that you're really thinking about the words that you're using, the way that people are going to navigate through that? Are your key points, is everything up top that you need people to read first? Is it clear what you want someone to do? So yeah, that idea that you really have to think and be considerate is something that we would also strongly encourage.
When we communicate mindfully, we're no longer just thinking about ourselves and the words we want to send out. We're then also thinking about the recipients. We're starting to think about how they may feel when they hear that language, how they may respond. And we can start to communicate in a way that encourages psychological safety. There's a model called the SCARF model, which has been developed by the Neuro Leadership Institute. And they've identified 5 needs that human beings have, 5 social needs that human beings have in the workplace. SCARF, it's always an acronym, isn't there? Everyone loves an acronym. So status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. I remembered them all.
That was good.
So if we take this as one tool that we use and we give this to a manager and we say, when you communicate, just see if you can tick off these 5 human needs. And if you do that, then you're well on your way to creating an environment of psychological safety. So status, is there a status threat within the group? So maybe there's certain roles within the group which are overlapping. And then on top of that, you've got the end of year reviews coming up where people need to show that they're better than their peers around them. It's a status threat. So what can I do with my communications or the way that we talk in the team or the discussions we have to extinguish that status threat? Certainty, I've made this mistake myself. If there's change, and there's always change in an organization, the brain loves certainty, hates uncertainty. So when we communicate, let's tick off that box, certainty. How can we give people a sense of certainty? So that doesn't mean telling them everything, but giving them a sense of certainty so that they know what's going on and what's coming. Autonomy, so moving away from micromanagement and the way that we talk. So not necessarily asking for every little detail, perhaps just asking, how are you progressing towards this goal? Is there anything else that you think we should be doing in order to meet this goal? So giving people that autonomy. And then relatedness, thinking about the relationships within the team and how to create that environment where people are working together, they're supporting each other, they're collaborating, and they're not competing. And then fairness, so making sure that everybody feels equal. And this has become a big one now that we've got remote teams, global teams. So sometimes you've got people in the room, people dialed in on Zoom, people in different countries. How do you ensure fairness so everybody feels included? What if you have like a team offsite, everyone gets together, they're having a great time, you got one person in India on the screen?
It's hard.
Yeah, it is. So there's ways that you can think about your communication that encourages psychological safety, and it doesn't have to be something that you make up as you go.
Right.
There are models like the SCARF model, and you can create your own guidelines. You can say, okay, in my organization, these are the 10 points that we want to address in order to create psychological safety. And then that can be part of the manager training. Say, as part of being a manager, these are the areas that we want you to look at. And you can make that part of the manager's objectives to do that. And if they need training because it won't come naturally to everybody, then offer them the training. So yeah, it's a really strong link there between the language we use and being able to create an environment of psychological safety.
Is there anywhere for kind of you would recommend for someone like yourself or in a position in an organization, in any industry, who feels like this is really important and they want to think about cultural change within their organization and look at mindfulness practice as a way of helping support people with stress? Is there anywhere you would direct them to start gathering some of those stats or collecting that information so they can put a solid business case together?
Yeah, because I guess a lot of people are looking at me and saying, oh, HSBC, they've got loads of budget to throw behind everything. It's easy for them. What about us? We've got 10 people. But actually, I would say just start doing stuff, because that's how we started. So we had one person who was passionate about mindfulness about 10 years ago, started running sessions for her colleagues in Sheffield.
Okay.
That gradually spread across the UK. And then about 3 years ago, they were given the remit to go global, and it turned into a permanent team. And that's when I was brought into the team to help them to go global. So they started with no budget, no support. It was a group of employees who saw the benefits in mindfulness, and it was helping them with their lives outside work, but also in terms of the work that they were doing. It gradually spread, so more employees became interested. And if you want to start, I would say that's the best way. Find those passionate, motivated employees who are willing to do it. And then what we do is make sure we gather some sort of data with everything we do. And sometimes we can complicate data because we think, is it scientifically valid? Is it statistically significant? There's all these terms. But actually, you don't always have to have that, because you can end up tying yourself in knots and ending up with nothing. So you could count simple metrics like how many people were interested in the sessions. So month by month. So I've run a couple of sessions every month.
Yeah.
This is how many people came along. It tells you something.
If people are coming back repeatedly, then they're getting something from it. It's doing something. People don't take half an hour or an hour out of their working week if it's not beneficial, because people are busy. So
yeah, exactly.
It has to bring that bigger impact, doesn't it, to your day and to your week? And
yeah, it does. So you can count the number of people who come along. You can send them emails afterwards saying, "Could you just send me some feedback on that?" Maybe don't use the word feedback.
Thoughts.
And ask them. And then you can gather that. And then when you present it in your business case, you could have 5 or 6 of those comments to say, these are actual comments from our employees. So, we don't have to complicate it. We don't have to tie it into absence numbers and things like that, because it's often impossible to do that. So keeping it simple, finding those passionate employees, and just doing it. And then we kind of grew organically, and the numbers went into the hundreds and into the thousands. And it was at that point that that we became a permanent team. We found a senior sponsor who was impressed with the work that we did.
Okay.
And agreed to sponsor us and turn us into a permanent team. So I guess that's what I would say about that.
And now you have a permanent group of mindfulness champions, or a mindfulness team at HSBC who really do this as a day-to-day kind of commitment.
Yeah, so we've got a team of 4 permanent full-time employees.
Yeah.
So we're the central global mindfulness team, and then we've also got around 200 mindfulness champions globally.
Wow.
So these are the guys who are the real heroes, because they've got their normal banking jobs, day-to-day banking jobs, and then they're volunteering to be champions. So they're going out and delivering mindfulness sessions to their colleagues, delivering mindfulness courses, entire 6-7 week courses to their colleagues, and volunteering to do that in their spare time. And I know a lot of organizations, do set up this champion model where you've got volunteers who are working in a particular area. And the advice I'd give on that is to really treat those champions as superheroes.
Yeah.
Because, the danger is they end up working almost like 2 jobs and burning themselves out when they're trying to help
everyone else not to do that.
Yeah. So working with their managers, working with their senior leadership, making it clear what they're doing, what they're contributing, and why it's important, getting support from their managers so that they can get time to do this, and they're not just using up all of their lunch breaks and doing work out of hours.
Mm-hmm.
So we do a lot of that. Working out how to reward them. Different companies will have different ways of rewarding employees. We have a point system. You can give people points and then they can use it to buy things. So it's just working out how you do that. If you've got nothing, then it could just simply be emails to the line manager saying, thank you for allowing your employee to be a champion. This is the impact that they've had by delivering these sessions. So there's lots that you can do, but really nurture those champions, because for us, they're the most valuable part of our program.
Thank you, Sean, so much for chatting to us at the Writer today. It's been a pleasure, and I feel like we've covered so many topics. We've talked about psychological safety. We've talked about your 3 pillars of mindfulness. We've linked everything back to language and thought about how, speaking to a global audience and bringing really the human elements of language into a workplace will help people on their mindfulness journey and create that culture in the workplace that we're really striving for.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
If anyone feels inspired by anything we've talked about today or wants to put some of these mindfulness ideas into practice, then we'd love to hear how it goes.